I'm going to read two pieces. The first is a very short piece of flash fiction. And this piece came about when I was thinking of dreams, including my dream to be a writer and a published author, and how having a dream and trying to achieve it can feel sometimes like this very difficult, delicate thing, which led me to think, what if there was a person whose job it was to protect dreams, to take care of dreams, no matter what may or may not come of them? Because having a dream in and of itself can be a thing of beauty. So this is what I came up with. It's called The Dream Keeper. The Dream Keeper lives by the lake at the edge of town. He is no taller than a child, and his skin is hard and wrinkled like tree bark. He walks with a hooked cane and wears a hooded cloak the color of scorched earth. Since the cloak obscures his face, some people think that he doesn't have one. It doesn't concern the Dream Keeper what others say. What concerns the Dream Keeper is protecting dreams. He keeps dreams in clear glass bottles, which float in a lake small enough to walk around and deep enough that you can't see the bottom. He works in silence. No one knows the sound of his voice. When dreamers stop by, the Dream Keeper gives them an empty bottle. When they blow into the bottle, it fills with light, and then the light turns into color. Some dreamers toss their bottles as far out into the lake as they can, while others bend down and gently push them into the water. Many stay and watch them drift away, while others leave immediately. It makes no difference to the Dream Keeper how long a dreamer stays. Crowds gather to watch bottles filled with every shade of every imaginable color in an endless assortment of ever-changing patterns float around the lake. They watch bottles twinkling like dozens of multicolored fairy lights, drift by bottles filled with swirls of peach and plum, tiny gold flowers embroidered on emerald green, and streaks of tangerine and marigold blending into magenta like a desert sunrise. Over time, the colors and patterns shift and change. Sometimes they become dim and muted, but other times they grow brighter. When a dreamer comes back, the Dream Keeper helps them find their bottle. If they can't retrieve it from the shore, he will take them out onto the lake with his rowboat. How long it takes to find the bottle doesn't concern the Dream Keeper. What concerns the Dream Keeper is that the dream is found. Once the dreamer has found their bottle, the Dream Keeper does not know what will happen. He does not know if the dreamer will immediately uncork the bottle, let the colors shoot up into the sky and dance with the wind, or if they will take the bottle home and hide it in a box in their attic. He does not know if the dreamer will pour the contents of their bottle into liquid gold and mold it into the shape of a heart, infuse it with cloves and cardamom, or whisper it to the moon. All he knows is that the dream is alive. That is enough. Thank you. I'm going to read a full short story. This is the one that was published in FreeFall Magazine last year and was a finalist for a 2024-2025 Alberta Magazine Award for Fiction. And this one, it was inspired in large part by watching a lot of my relatives' experiences with aging and illness, and I would like to dedicate it to my grandfather who died last year. It's called Oscar Grew a Tree. Oscar was putting on his coat to go out for a morning walk one day when he noticed something unusual on the floor. He bent down and picked up a beige, triangle-shaped object no larger than a quarter. It was light and smooth at the edges. He turned it over and examined the other side. It looked the same. It didn't look like anything important, so he threw it out. As Oscar was putting on his jacket to go for his morning walk the next day, he noticed another beige triangle-shaped object no larger than a quarter lying on the floor. He picked it up, turning it over again and again. but came no closer to figuring out what it was. It didn't look important, so he threw it out. The following morning, Oscar noticed yet another beige triangle-shaped object on the floor. He bent down and picked it up. As he was leaning over the garbage to throw it out, he noticed something unusual about his reflection in the mirror. It looked like there was something wrong with his head. A small patch of skin on the top of his head had turned translucent, and it was glowing faintly. He ran his index finger over the spot. It felt warm and smooth. He poked it. It didn't hurt. He looked in the garbage at the small beige triangle-shaped object and realized that it was exactly the same color as his skin. He picked it out of the garbage and held it in the palm of his hand. He ran his thumb and index finger over it. It felt soft and smooth and slightly warm. He held it up to his scalp and discovered that it fit into part of the translucent section. He went through the garbage and found the other two pieces. Altogether, the pieces fit into his head like a puzzle, but he couldn't get any of them to stay. Not knowing what else to do, Oscar left the pieces of his scalp on the bathroom counter, put on a hat, and went for his morning walk. He walked down the street and along the lakeshore to his favorite coffee shop. As he was walking, he couldn't stop thinking about the pieces of his scalp that had fallen off and the translucent film growing in their place. Whatever it was that was happening, he didn't feel good about it. When he got to the coffee shop, Oscar took off his hat and asked the staff whether they noticed anything unusual. He bent down so they could see the top of his head. They said that they couldn't see anything. Oscar asked them to look again. They bent over the counter to get a closer look and said that his head looked perfectly normal. Oscar thanked them for looking and ordered a coffee and a carrot raisin muffin. He sat in his usual seat at the back by the window and read the newspaper, starting with the front section and then the sports. He skimmed the business section and then read a few articles in the lifestyle and entertainment sections. He read his horoscope, did a Sudoku and a crossword, and then he started to walk home. When Oscar got home, he put the pieces of his scalp on the dresser beside a picture of his wife, Beatrice, sitting by the lake shortly after they were married. She was wearing a white sundress with yellow flowers on it, and her dark, wavy hair was flowing out behind her. She was smiling just enough so that you could see her teeth. He asked Beatrice if she knew what was going on, but she didn't answer. He paced back and forth. He stared at the pieces of his scalp, hoping they might divulge some clue as to what was going on, but they didn't. He felt the same as he always did, but he knew that something was wrong. Oscar found a piece of his scalp on the floor the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each morning, he put the piece of his scalp on the bathroom counter and then went out for his morning walk. When he got home, he put the piece of his scalp on the dresser with the others and looked at his head in the mirror. The translucent section at the top was getting bigger, and it looked like there was something growing beneath the surface. He held a mirror up close, but couldn't tell what it was. Every couple of days, Oscar asked everyone working at the coffee shop whether they noticed anything unusual about his head, but they never did. He asked his neighbors, but they didn't notice anything unusual with his head either. He booked an appointment with his doctor to see what was wrong, but his doctor said that his head looked perfectly normal. Even though no one else noticed anything wrong with his head, Oscar knew deep within him that something was wrong. A few weeks later, Oscar woke up and saw something beginning to poke out from the top of his head. It had a pointed tip. He ran his fingers over it. It felt firm and slightly jagged. He poked it. It didn't hurt. When he got to the coffee shop, he asked everyone if they could see anything sticking out from the top of his head, but they couldn't. The next day, the thing growing out of the top of Oscar's head was slightly bigger, and the following day, it looked even bigger. The thing growing out of Oscar's head grew bigger and bigger until it looked like the top of a tree. The tree grew taller and taller, and then it grew branches and needles. The tree kept growing until it was about as tall as the length of Oscar's hand. Oscar asked everyone working at the coffee shop if they could see a tiny tree growing out of the top of his head, but they laughed and said that they couldn't. They said his head looked just like it always did. When he got home, he looked at Beatrice's picture and asked if she knew what was going on. She didn't answer. Oscar thought about making another appointment with his doctor, but he decided not to. If his doctor hadn't found anything wrong with his head last time, he wasn't likely going to find anything wrong this time. Even if no one could see a tree growing out of the top of his head, Oscar knew that it was there. He knew that something was wrong. A few weeks later, Oscar woke up and found pine needles growing all over his body. They were growing down his arms and legs and across his stomach and chest. He poked one. It didn't hurt. He washed and scrubbed them in the shower, but they didn't come off. He tried to pull one out, but it hurt too much, so he left it alone. At the coffee shop, he rolled up his sleeves and asked the staff if they noticed anything unusual about his arms, but they didn't. They said that his arms looked just like they always did. He ordered a piece of lemon loaf and a coffee. He sat in his usual seat at the back by the window and read the paper, starting with the front section and then the sports. He skimmed the business section and read a few articles from the lifestyle and entertainment sections. He read his horoscope, did a Sudoku and a crossword, and then he started walking home. When he got home, Oscar pulled up his sleeves and looked at his arms. He turned them over again and again, looking at the pine needles. They looked almost like hair. He ran his fingers over them. They felt a little bristly. He touched the top of the tree growing out of the top of his head, but he didn't feel anything. He ran his fingers along the tiny needles and branches. Something strange, something very strange was happening to him, but he didn't know what. Maybe it was best that his wife wasn't around to see it, and his children lived hours away. The next morning, Oscar discovered that the pine needles were growing thicker. The following morning, he found more pine needles growing all over his body. And the morning after that, he found even more. The needles spread across his skin, all the way from his fingertips to his toes, and crept up his neck along his face. After pine needles had grown over every inch of Oscar's skin, small branches started to grow out of his fingertips and toes. They grew longer and longer until they were the length of Oscar's index finger. And then they grew leaves. If he folded the branches and leaves carefully around the edges of his foot, he could still fit into his shoes, but it hurt to walk too far or too fast. He asked everyone working at the coffee shop whether they noticed anything growing out of his fingertips, but they laughed and said that his fingers looked just like they always did. Next, his arms and legs began to grow stiff, like wood. They grew stiffer and stiffer, making it harder and harder for Oscar to walk. He tried to keep walking to the coffee shop every morning, but his legs were so stiff, he felt like he was dragging wooden planks. His morning walk got increasingly difficult until he could no longer manage it. He drove to the coffee shop every morning and went for walks around the block instead. But he soon found even short walks took too much effort. Eventually, Oscar's arms and legs were so stiff that he could hardly walk. The pine needles grew so thick that Oscar could hardly see his skin. The branches growing out of his fingers and toes were so long he could no longer wear shoes, and he found it difficult to hold a cup of coffee, read the newspaper, or do anything with his hands. He hired someone to come by a couple of times a week to prepare most of his meals and clean his house. Oscar began to spend most of his days sitting on a wooden chair by his garden. He read every article in the newspaper. He did every crossword and puzzle. Each morning, he put a small picture of Beatrice on their wedding day, wearing a long white satin dress with her dark wavy hair pinned back and holding a bouquet of pink roses in his pocket. He placed the picture on the empty chair beside him and imagined that she was sitting with him. He called his son and daughter every day and told them that he loved them and he missed them. One day, Oscar was sitting in his chair when he felt the tree on the top of his head start to grow taller. His head felt heavier and heavier, making it harder for him to look straight ahead. He looked down and saw the branches sticking out of his fingers and toes were growing longer and longer. His arms and legs became stiffer and stiffer until they felt so stiff he didn't think he could move. Oscar didn't know what to do. So he looked at the garden and let the hours pass. He looked at his red poppies, blue and purple irises, and blush pink peonies. He looked at the lavender patch, which was just about to bloom. Lavender had always been one of Beatrice's favorite flowers. She loved how they attracted bees and butterflies, and she loved to make dried bouquets to place throughout the house so that they could smell lavender all year. He remembered how they used to spend hours gardening together side by side, and how he used to brush the back of his fingers across Beatrice's knee and then squeeze her hand. He remembered how her cheeks had turned bright pink, like their roses. He looked at their rose garden, which had just finished blooming for the season. Two of the bright pink roses still had a couple petals left, but it wouldn't be long before they were gone. He looked across the lawn to where he used to make snowmen with his children in the winter and hide Easter eggs for them in the spring. In the summer, they used to host barbecues, potlucks, and birthday parties, and had thrown a large engagement party for their daughter Lily there. It felt like a long time ago that the backyard had been full of people, but if he closed his eyes, he could almost hear his children's laughter echoing across the garden. Oscar looked up at the sky, looked up at the sun, and saw that it was starting to set. The sky turned yellow and tangerine, and then streaks of lavender appeared. As the sun sunk into the horizon, he took one last look at Beatrice's picture, and then he pushed himself out of his chair with every ounce of strength he had left. He walked over to the edge of his garden by the pine tree, where he used to push his kids in a wooden swing he'd made for them. Standing still, he firmly planted his feet in the ground. The tree on the top of his head grew bigger, and he felt himself become smaller. His arms and legs grew so stiff that he could no longer move. The branches on his toes dug into the earth and began to spread. Oscar closed his eyes and let himself take root.